Thank you very much for your time and effort invested for contributing to this knowledge process, which we have initiated together with World Bank Institute to look at innovations happening on access to information through ICTs. What we intend to do today is to share our research finding and then enrich our knowledge collectively based on that research findings, combined together with your insight and experience in getting getting a way forward of how ICTs can very effectively be used for enabling access to information for a citizen-centric support mechanism of governance delivery on the ground. The reason we have been doing this because while we talk about access to information, ICT comes automatically. They do have a very symbiotic relationship because ICT enables facilitation of information and knowledge among people, and that's therefore we thought that it will be useful to look at systematically how the experiments on ground are making a change. We have looked 7 initiatives as per the case studies. 2 are from Bangladesh, 2 very interesting innovations. I'm happy that the members from those 2 innovations are here today in this room, and there are 5 innovations which we looked at India. Would be sharing my colleagues would be sharing those outcomes, and then we would encourage your question and answer and clarifications and actually additional thoughts so that we enrich that body of knowledge. In the afternoon, we have requested distinguished panelists to build on that and to give us a collective way forward. So that's the structure of today's deliberation. With this very small introduction, I thank you once again and welcome to this sharing workshop. Thank you.
I'm very pleased to be here with you all today to discuss this issue of access to information and the use of ICT to enhance transparency and accountability. Today I would like to touch upon briefly on open government issues, and particularly regarding the importance of developing citizen-centered ICT applications to enhance the implementation of the Right to Information Act here in Bangladesh and transparency policies. While we're here to discuss the use of ICT tools and how they can contribute to open government by fostering transparency, citizen participation, and public accountability, ICT tools are not a silver bullet that will solve all problems. Many researchers agree, acknowledge that greater transparency will not lead to increase accountability unless civic engagement is strengthened and people act upon the information that is released or published. So in order for such engagement or actions to take place, it is important to support what we call demand-side governance through citizen-centered ICT applications. E-government is no longer viewed as the provision of information or services via internet as it was defined a few years ago, but instead it's a two-way communication which is transforming the way citizens interact with government. And as Bangladesh moves forward in implementing its Access to Information Program, Act, and demand for transparency and accountability increases, I'm sure there will be more opportunities for the use of ICT facilitated initiatives to strengthen transparency in this country. Let me briefly finally say that I think there is great potential for the use of ICT in Bangladesh and in the South Asia region, particularly given the youth population. There is great potential among youth groups regarding the development and use of ICT for transparency and accountability, particularly as we know that young people are quite tech savvy and familiar with these technologies more than adults. So they can more easily incorporate ICT to right information and transparency initiatives here in Bangladesh and the region. So let me conclude by thanking all the participants today here. I also want to thank the organizers, One World Foundation, India, Naimur, and his incredible team for undertaking this project in a very, very short period of time. I'm sure you will have time to look at the cases documented and are quite impressive. It's quite impressive the work that they have done. I also want to thank IPSA for hosting this event. And finally, I would like to thank the Canadian International Development Agency, CIDA, which has been supporting the Access to Information program that I coordinate at the World Bank Institute for the last 6 years here in Bangladesh through the CIDA WBI governance partnership program in Bangladesh. So thanks to all.
As far as ICT is concerned, I think being from a social science background, I'm somebody who's at the kindergarten stage, but who understands a little bit about how technology works, and I have seen some fantastic uses of information and communications technology in these parts, and I've written about some of them, and I think there's a lot of potential. However, what is crucial for those technologies to work is for information to be made available. And that is where that is where the biggest battles are. And I would like to start with one such battle. The very idea of a human being's right to know what his or her government is doing is quite ancient, it's quite old actually. And it emerges at a very difficult time in one country, in France. During the French Revolution, one of the major demands was people just didn't know what happened to some of their brethren. Because there was an interesting mechanism in France which was ruled by the monarchy, the Capets, that family. The king would sign something called carte blanche. It's called lettre de cachet. Yeah, that's what it was called. It was a blank piece of paper with the signature and seal of the king, and he would sell it to his nobles. The nobles would buy that and keep it as a major weapon. If they didn't like somebody, they would write the name of that person and have him thrown in the Bastille. People had absolutely no clue as to where these guys went. They just knew that they've been taken away and put in the Bastille. People died there. That's why if you look at the progress of the French Revolution in 1789, one of the first symbols of absolutist monarchical power that falls is the Bastille prison. That is the first place of attack. So the revolutionaries barge into the Bastille prison and they release all the inmates. So, and a lot of bloodshed is there. But after all the dust starts settling down, and the revolutionaries get down to writing something that has become a historical document. For the first time in any country, in any part of the world, did a set of people decide that, look, we are human beings, and because we are human beings, we are entitled to lead a dignified life. We can't be oppressed, we can't be subjugated, we should not be exploited, or we should not be harmed in any way. Therefore, these are the set of rights that every human being must be entitled to. And interestingly, that is the forerunner of the concept of human rights. They called it the Declaration of the Rights of Man. And for the first time in that declaration, just like other rights like right to life, right to property, right to freedom of speech and expression, right to fair trial, which we are all very familiar with, there was also something called right to know. Because what happened was these people were taxpayers before the revolution, and taxes to all kinds of authorities. They paid taxes to the king, they paid teeths to the church, they were in debt with the moneylender, the police could extract money from them in any way. So one of the first things that they said was that, look, if the state collects taxes, it should be based on our consent, either directly from us or through our representatives. And most importantly, they also said that once we pay tax, we have a right to know what the government does with that tax. So that is something that they have mentioned in Article 14 of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen, that every human being should have. They did not say that this should be available only to French citizens. They said no, this should be available to any person born as a human being in any corner of the world. Along with that, they also said that society as a whole has a right to ask a public official for an accounting of his administration. What have you done in the course of your governance functions? How are you governing us? What decisions have you taken? And what kind of reasoning have you applied? Tell us. We are holding them to account. This is where the seed of democracy is being sown. And the right to know is so central to this very revolution. Now, those of you who might be experts or well versed in feminist studies may ask, oh my God, this is such a gender insensitive term, Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. What about women? We have another document from the same period. So Declaration of the Rights of Woman and the Female Citizen comes around the same time. Olympa is the revolutionary who actually authored it, and she also repeats the same things but in a much more nuanced manner. She doesn't talk about just man as a citizen, very gender friendly. She says female and male citizens have the right to verify, either directly or through their elected representatives, the necessity of the public contribution. Public contribution means tax. And men and women joined together have a right to demand an accounting from a government functionary. Of course, the revolution, as most revolutions do, they eat up their own children. So all these beautiful people, very forward-thinking, progressive-thinking people, were all killed by the same use of the guillotine. But the ideas that they generated survived beyond their lifetimes. And in fact, that right to know is what forms the basis of Article 19 in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and that's post-World War scenario. There's a big demand for human rights at the end of the Second World War, because once the World War came to an end, it became very clear that Europe and parts of Asia and Africa had suffered such gross human rights abuses. And one of the reasons why people in other parts of the world, or people sometimes living in the same country, didn't ever get to know that these human rights abuses were occurring was because there was such a clampdown on access to information. There were murmured rumors about the possibility of concentration camps until the very last 1 or 2 years of the Second World War. There was just no information at all that so many people, so many Jews and so many Poles and so many homosexuals and so many gypsies were all being exterminated, through gas chambers. There was no information. So when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was written down by about 50 countries, they said one of the human rights should be the right to freedom of speech and expression, right to freedom of opinion, and that right includes, as a part of it, the freedom to seek information, freedom to receive information, and freedom to impart information. So seek and receive is something that is so central to the right to know. Imparting information is central to the right to freedom of the press. And you can only impart information when you have access to information. But Universal Declaration of Human Rights has no mechanism for its implementation. It is only something like a policy document. Nobody has the obligation to ensure that whoever signs the UDHR actually implements it. So in 1966, they actually came up, the United Nations members came up with a binding international covenant on civil and political rights. So there also in the article, in Article 19, the right to freedom of speech and expression and the right to seek, receive and impart information were included as a basic human right. This is where most of the standard discourse on the right to information ends. ordinarily. That right to information is a civil and political right because people should exercise control over governance, they should hold their governments accountable. But in the 1990s onwards, there has been a change in the understanding of the right to information. Right to information has increasingly become part of almost all rights, as you will see later on. It's part of the right to water. Right to water doesn't mean just access to water as in clean, safe, potable water in sufficient quantities within a reasonable distance from the residence of the person. It's also about information accessibility, right to seek, receive information and impart information concerning water issues. So the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, Article 9C3 was unpackaged. The right to water was unpackaged by the treaty monitoring body called the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, and they laid down a list of things that should actually form the content of right to water. So when governments deal with their obligation of providing right to water or honoring right to water for all their citizens, part of it is to give access to information relating to water issues. It's not just individuals but also groups have a right to have full and equal access to information concerning water, and not just water which is controlled by government, but water services provided by anybody. And also the environment, because after all, water is not something that you can create by putting oxygen and hydrogen atoms together. Nature creates it. So how is environment being used? How it is being exploited? Or how it is being harnessed, depending upon what ideology one follows. All of these matters should be in the public domain. Right to information is part of the right to adequate food. It's such a basic issue in South Asian countries where there is so much of food insecurity. What kinds of food security policies is the government or our governments developing? That must be done in an accountable and transparent manner, ensuring that there is enough participation for people. So the right to food is not just to have, choice, sumptuous food on your plates. Examples from India and Bangladesh and other countries in the region where poverty is a serious problem. It shows very clearly that very often people do not merely lack access to food, they also lack access to information about why is it that they are not having enough food. Despite the fact that millions and millions of dollars are spent on social safety net programs, a huge chunk of food grains meant for the poor to be sold to them at subsidized rates are diverted and black marketed. People have a right to know. It's a big, big problem in India. So right to adequate food includes access to information about food. Right to health. So the right to health in Article 12b(4) of the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, it says that every human being has a right to the highest attainable standard of health. So what does that mean? Does it just mean the right to remain healthy? No, it also includes the right to information accessibility concerning health issues. But of course, with a rider. Everybody has a right to access information relating to health issues, but that doesn't mean that I have a right to know about the status of your own health. I have a right to know the status of my own health, what my doctor is saying, but I cannot ask that about my neighbors, my friends, or my enemies. So there is a restriction. So it's a qualified right. Similarly, right to access information extends to maternal, child, and reproductive health issues. And it is not just information that the state has, but state also has to ensure that third parties, private service providers, do not interfere, do not limit people's right to access health-related information. And of course, part of access to information is also issues are about issues relating to health education. People have a right to access health education as well. So this is also part of the right to information. Right to information is part of the fundamental right or the basic human right of adequate housing. Everybody should have a shelter on their heads. Even animals and mammals and birds look for shelter throughout their lifetimes. Even human beings have this right. And very often what happens is, in countries like yours and mine, this happens so frequently in India as well. Right now, I think in our state of Orissa, efforts are being made by the state government to evict people from their villages, from their homes, from the place where they live for several generations, in order to build a steel plant. They just want to kick them out because and sometimes quite often whenever I get the opportunity, I place this statement come challenge before policymakers and say, please make a plan for setting up a steel plant or a thermal project or a hydropower project in the heart of Delhi, and then we will see how much of support you will get for it. How many court cases will the government land up with? Therefore, they always go and grab lands of people who are the weakest, who are not sufficiently mobilized, and whose lands are the cheapest to acquire. And that's why the right to adequate housing includes people's right to know why they are being evicted, what is the alternative purpose for which that land or housing is going to be used, and what kinds of compensation they are entitled to when the state evicts them. Because the state never evicts saying that some minister wants to do it. State always evicts them saying that we are throwing you out of your homes because we need this land of yours for public interest, for public purpose. So we have to make sacrifices. We actually, those of us who are here, most of us are lucky enough. There are other people who have to make sacrifices so that we live better. So the right to adequate housing includes access to information, and this is a big battle in so many instances in our South Asian countries. And of course, the right to education quite naturally is central to accessing information. But it is not just about accessing information about social studies or civics or physics or chemistry or whatever. It's also about people's right to know whether there is a transparent and effective system which monitors whether or not education is directed to the educational objectives set out in the covenant. People can and people are capable of educating or indoctrinating young minds to grow up into hating other communities. That is not the objective of education. Education must respect human rights. So the state has an obligation to ensure that human rights friendly and human rights compliant educational policies are developed, and these must be done in a transparent and participatory manner. And of course, if parents have to monitor how the educational policies are being implemented, they need access to information. So the right to education also includes the right to information. Look at CEDAW. There's a lot of work that has happened in Bangladesh on CEDAW. Women have, on a non-discriminatory basis, the right to access information in a range of things, relating to their families, relating to healthcare, relating to matters relating to marriage and family, etc., etc. All of these kinds of information, women also have a right to access, and this is also part of a binding treaty like CEDAW. But the most beautiful description of any sector or any segment of the population, their right of access to information, it is found in the Child Rights Charter. It says every child shall have the right to freedom of speech and expression, and this includes the freedom to seek, receive and impart information. Many of us in India who were training officers on how to implement the Indian Right to Information Act, very often we faced questions. Doesn't somebody have to be about 21 years of age in order to get information under the RTI Act? We would ask him why. Why do you say so? Because he has to be a citizen. So the idea being that you are a citizen only if you are casting your vote. Otherwise you are not a citizen. He said absolute rubbish. The moment you are born and your nationality is clear and you have your proof of birth certificate, your birth certificate or proof of birth, you are a citizen of the country. And the moment the child is capable of expressing oneself, if he or she wants to file an RTI application, has to be treated. Has to be dealt with according to law. You can't say, oh, you are a bacha, no right to information for you. Let your parents come. No, that's not allowed. Every child has a human right to seek, receive, impart information, and there are special kinds of access rights for special categories of children, children with disabilities. State parties have a duty to make education and vocational information and guidance available and accessible to all children on a non-discriminatory basis. Refugee children have a right to obtain information about their parents or possible ways of being reunited with their own families or even rehabilitation. So there are these special rights as well. Migrant workers. Just like the Child Rights Charter, the International Convention on the Protection of Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of Their Families, it says that every migrant worker and their family not only have the right to freedom of speech and expression, but also freedom to seek, receive and impart information. Just because you are a migrant worker your peculiar circumstances have compelled you to leave your place of residence and go and work somewhere else in order to earn a source of livelihood, doesn't mean that you do not have any right to information. No, you have a right there. And this currently is a big challenge, it's a big battle in India. So far I had been talking about human rights instruments. Kindly look at the United Nations Corruption Convention, UNCAC, United Nations Convention Against Corruption. There is so much of emphasis on transparency, accountability, and most importantly, access to information in this instrument. Every party has a duty to ensure that they promote active participation of individuals in the fight against corruption. They have to be educated sufficiently in these matters. And people's participation, how does people's participation happen? Can we just say that, look, we are holding this meeting and you invite 500 people, but you don't tell them where they have to go. You don't tell them what is it that they are going to participate in. What are the issues they are going to discuss. So similarly, that kind of participation will just not work. So the UN Convention also says that when we say people's participation, this is what we mean. We mean that increase transparency of and promote the contribution of the public to decision-making processes in government. Otherwise, it won't be a democracy. And ensure, in order to participate in decision-making processes, ensure that people have effective access to information. Now, I have bored you for so long. There are some of these, major problems, which these are generally seen as bottlenecks for access to information. However, in the 21st century, South Asia is in a reasonably happy position, but I wouldn't
focused. We tried to make it strategy oriented.
Chief Information Commissioner, Information Commission, he is here with us, and